This lecture is from Chapter 9, specifically concerning the stages of development. In this lecture, we'll discuss prenatal development and the physical, cognitive, and psychosocial development in all the other stages of life. So first, let's look at prenatal development. There are 3 stages of prenatal development. The first is called the germinal stage, which is the first and second weeks. Some important terms from this stage are conception, which occurs when sperm fertilizes an egg and forms a zygote. A zygote is the one cell structure that is created when a sperm and egg merge. This cell doesn't last long. It begins to multiply pretty quickly. This process of multiplication is called mitosis. It is worth noting that during the germinal stage, the zygote has not yet attached to the mother's uterus. The embryonic stage would be weeks 3 through 8. At this point, the zygote has attached itself to the uterus and therefore is now called an embryo. The placenta is a structure connected to the uterus that provides nourishment and oxygen from the mother to the developing embryo via the umbilical cord. So this is where the embryo is attached to the uterus, would be the placenta. The fetal stage is the rest of the pregnancy, weeks 9 through 40. And at this point, the embryo now becomes what's called a fetus. So let's go ahead and look at a diagram of what occurs during this stage. So these are the stages of fetal development, as we just discussed a little bit. There's, you can see, I won't go through the whole diagram because it's a lot of information. But you can see 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks. Then we jump to 10 weeks, 15 weeks, 30 weeks, and 36 weeks. So be sure and check that out and look at interesting how the stages of how a fetus develops. So now let's move forward and take a look at infancy through childhood. As I said, we'll look at the physical development, cognitive development, and psychosocial development at each stage of life. Physical development, newborns weigh between 5 and 10 pounds. By 2 years old, the weight will have quadrupled. The average length of a newborn is 19.5 inches, increasing to 34.4 inches by 2 years old. Brain development. During early childhood, ages 3 to 6, the frontal lobes grow rapidly. The frontal lobes are associated with planning, reasoning, memory, and impulse control. Therefore, by the time children reach school age, they are developmentally capable of controlling their attention and behavior. Through the elementary school years, the frontal, temporal, occipital, and parietal lobes all grow in size. The brain growth spurts experienced in childhood, which accounts for cognitive advances. Motor development. Motor skills are our ability to move our bodies and manipulate objects. And if you look at the diagram on the left, you'll see there is a developmental progression of motor skills throughout childhood. We start with just sensory skills, and then gross motor skills, being able to sit up and having muscle tone and strength. And then fine motor skills, which would be dexterity, like riding. Self-care skills, being able to toilet, groom, dress yourself. And then we move beyond to just life skills, which we learn as adults. Cognitive development in childhood, there are Piaget developed stages of cognitive development. There's the sensory motor stage, which is between birth and 2 years, knowledge gained through senses and motor movement. Pre-operational stage, which is approximately age 2 through 7, which you're able to think symbolically and you're very egocentric, very focused on yourself. Concrete operational stage is from 7 to 12 years, and then you begin to think logically about concrete events. You can't really think abstractly yet, but concrete things you can think about. The formal operational stage lasts from about 12 years all through life. You're able to have logical, organized thought and deductive reasoning. Essentially, you're able to think critically. You're able to think abstractly. Psychosocial development at this stage. John Bowlby developed the concept of attachment theory. He defined attachment as the affectional or emotional bond or tie that an infant forms with the mother or primary caregiver. An infant must form this bond with a primary caregiver in order to have normal social and emotional development. Mary Ainsworth furthered his concept by identifying 4 stages of attachment. So let's look at those. She, as it said, defined 4 stages or 4 styles of attachment. The first is secure, which is a healthy relationship with primary caregiver, shows appropriate distress when left alone, is able to seek support in relationships, and can regulate their emotions and manage conflict in close relationships. Another attachment style she identified is called ambivalent, which there's limited parental availability. The parents aren't really available as much as they should be. Child feels a lot of distress when they're left. They crave close relationships but struggle to trust. A need for reassurance from partners and feelings of anxiety and jealousy are common. Avoidant attachment style. There's actually probably abuse or neglect from the caregiver. There's no preference for parental presence. They don't really care if they're there or not. They're very independent. A pattern of withdrawal. They have a tendency to minimize the feelings of others, and they have a preference for casual relationships, not very close relationships. Disorganized attachment style. This person probably had pretty inconsistent parenting. Intimate relationships are confusing for them, and they have feelings of unworthiness, a tendency towards aggressive or antisocial behaviors. So that's the impact of those attachment styles, as the title says, then and now. So not only are there different attachment styles, there are also different parenting styles. 4 parenting styles that have been identified are the authoritative parent, who solves problems together with the child, sets clear rules and expectations, has open communication and natural consequences. There's the authoritarian style, which is very parent-driven, very focused on what the parent wants, therefore strict rules and punishment are in action. There's one-way communication with little consideration of child's social, emotional, and behavioral needs. The permissive parent is the opposite of the authoritarian parent, very child-driven. The parent rarely gives or enforces rules and overindulges the child to avoid conflict. The neglectful parent, unfortunately, is a completely uninvolved or absent parent. Therefore, they provide little nurturance or guidance and are indifferent to child's social, emotional, and behavioral needs. You will see from the textbook, and it's kind of obvious, that the most effective parenting style has proved to be the authoritative style, which is both strict and perhaps sets regulations, but also works with the child and focuses on their needs and has open communication. So let's move on from childhood to adolescence. Adolescence is considered the period of development that begins at puberty and ends at emerging adulthood. The typical age range of adolescence is from 12 to 18 years. Physical development during this stage, adrenarche and gonadarche, maturing of the adrenal and sex glands. The adrenal glands, by the way, help regulate metabolism, immune system, blood pressure, response to stress, and the development of sexual characteristics. Primary sexual characteristics, organs specifically needed for reproduction, like the uterus and ovaries in females and testes in males, are developed at this point. Secondary sex characteristics, physical signs of sexual maturation that do not directly involve sex organs, such as the development of breasts and hips in females, and the development of facial hair and a deepened voice in males. These things also occur during adolescence. The menarche, girls begin their menstrual period around 12 to 13 years of age on average. Spermarche, males experience their first ejaculation around 13 to 14 years of age. And during adolescence, there's often a growth spurt. Cognitive development during adolescence. Teenagers move beyond that concrete thinking of children and become capable of abstract thought. Teen thinking is also characterized by the ability to consider multiple points of view, imagine hypothetical situations, debate ideas and opinions, and form new ideas. So cognitive development really takes place in the adolescence years where you're able to think abstractly and think critically about ideas. Cognitive empathy develops, which is the ability to have concern for others and consider their point of view. Let's look at psychosocial development during adolescence. Peer relationships become a central focus in adolescent lives. As adolescents work to form their identities, they pull away from their parents, and the peer group becomes very important. In other words, their sense of self now not only comes from their caregivers, but also their peers. Emerging adulthood occurs between the age of 18 and the mid-20s, so it's a very short period. It is an in-between time where identity exploration is focused on work and love, which is why I included the quote from Freud, who we all know is a famous psychologist. Love and work, work and love, that's all there is. That's essentially a quote for the emerging adulthood. They're really focused on work and love. Let's move on to adulthood, which begins around 20 years of age and has three distinct stages. There's early adulthood, middle adulthood, and late adulthood. So physical development in early adulthood, which would be considered from the 20s to the 40s, physical maturation is complete and our physical abilities are at their peak. Middle adulthood, which would be from the 40s to the 60s, physical decline may begin, which could include your hair turning gray, wrinkles appearing, vision worsening, etc. Late adulthood, which is from the 60s on, the senses may decline and there may be a loss of muscle strength. Cognitive development, let's look at that in early, middle, and late adulthood. Adult cognitive development is a complex, ever-changing process that may be even more active than cognitive development in infancy and early childhood. In early adulthood and middle adulthood, our cognitive abilities remain steady. Throughout early and middle adulthood, our crystallized intelligence, which is information that we've gathered through our experience, tends to hold steady as we age. It may even improve in early and middle adulthood. We're able to remember more things and recall them more often. In late adulthood, unfortunately, we begin to experience a decline in another area of our cognitive abilities, which is fluid intelligence, which is our ability to process information. As I said, these processes unfortunately become slower. Many people in late adulthood begin to experience dementia, which is a type of Alzheimer's. Dementia is a general term for loss of memory, language, problem solving, and other thinking abilities that are severe enough to interfere with daily life. Some early signs of dementia, you can look at the diagram to the left, would be speech or writing changes, visual image changes, altered judgment, difficulty solving problems, changes in someone's personality or their mood, social changes, the way they relate to others. Common symptom we see is misplacing items and memory loss. So all these can be early signs of dementia, which can be important to recognize in others. In late adulthood, psychosocial development, positive relationships with significant others in our adult years have been found to contribute to a state of well-being. Most adults in the United States identify themselves through their relationships with family, particularly with spouses, children, and parents. I think that speaks to the importance of social relationships as we get older. That becomes our main, as it says, main state of well-being and main source of meaning. So that's a glance at the stages of life from prenatal development to late adulthood. Thank you for listening, and please let me know if you have any questions.